Aloha, everybody. We are here today with Charlie Grapski down in Florida, who has obtained some documents, I believe, from St. Louis, pertaining to a police shooting down there. Can you give us some more information there, Charlie?
Yeah, sure, Dan. What it is this, of course, has to do with the Mike Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, in the suburbs of St. Louis. And what I discovered is I've been very busy with a lot of the Albuquerque stuff, but I'm also the director of the Open Records Project in conjunction with Photography is Not a Crime. And in that, we have a goal, which is to teach people how to use and why it's important to understand the public records laws and other open government laws around the country. In each state has its own public records law usually. And our goal is to get a team in every state and hopefully in every locality teaching others, advocating for, and successfully using public records laws to hold government officials to account and to have a fully informed public. And so while I've been really active since April with Albuquerque and trying to do just that, and it's been hard to do all that and keep up with what's been going on because there's so many of these fatal shootings every day. But with the recent, not a shooting, but the recent New York City one with the chokehold, and now with Mike Brown in Ferguson, I decided I needed to do something to try and get that project going on there. And the goal was to find out what happened and get the evidence out there and respect the public's right to these records. And so I started out by looking to the basic records, the incident report, and that I found out that the ACLU had made a public records request under Missouri law on the 12th for the incident report by the St. Louis County Police Department, which is not the same as the Ferguson Police Department.
Right.
And I found out that they had been denied that request, and that it was, I predicted what the exemption claim would be, that there's this blanket open investigation exemption, and therefore anything that might be pertaining to the case is exempt. And that's not what the law says. The investigation report is exempt during the ongoing nature of the investigation. Once it's finalized, it's a public record. But just because the investigation looks at an incident report or a video doesn't make the video or any other evidence or any other document exempt, especially if it already is a public record prior to the investigation. It doesn't lose that status. And so I filed a public records request for the same document. And I then, since it had already been denied, I decided, particularly with the urgency of the matter, it was time to pull out a tactic that I've been developing for a number of years, and that's what I've been calling it, a global public records request. And that is, I've called upon people in the hundreds, and we got about 150, and I'd love to see thousands in the next one, and there will be a next one starting after tomorrow. But I asked them to make the same public records request the ACLU was denied. Now, the ACLU has filed a lawsuit to have that record produced and to declare that it was wrong to withhold it. The National Bar Association has also filed a suit for the same thing, although theirs is a little bit broader, and they're asking for more of the information. Now, we were successful today in obtaining that record that had been denied. Now, let me just give you a little back. There was a little story. I started this on Sunday. And on Monday, I followed up with the lieutenant in charge of the records division of St. Louis County, and I discovered that he believed that their system went down. And so all of the emails that were sent, and there were about 60 at that time, never made it and disappeared, which that was a little problematic. I don't believe he's involved in this. From what I've studied from some of the error messages, it looks like in anticipation of a threatened anonymous denial of service attack, that the police department shut down its own email and denied access to incoming emails, which is problematic. Right. That I don't think that was an appropriate response. But I had to then go and tell everybody, resend. And it was only until yesterday morning that they started getting a bounce back saying that their email had been rejected. But we've gotten that, and I've been communicating with this lieutenant for the last couple of days, and he's been very honest and upfront with me and professional. And he promised to get the record to me yesterday, but he got called to the ground in Ferguson and wasn't able to do it. And so he got me an email about 7:30 last night. And then today I followed up with him, and he provided the record. And now he's sending it to the 150 other people who requested it.
Great. I did hear on the news not that long ago, just the other day, that that the hacktivists Anonymous had basically declared war on the Ferguson Police Department too. So maybe as a reaction, they did shut down their servers, or maybe they were under attack at that point too. So that could explain why that happened there. But either way,
it could be, except I've seen some of the error messages from some of the emails, and they're not all the same. It's not the one that I got, but I've seen some where certain domains were being denied by a McAfee system that had been invoked to say, we are not accepting emails from this domain. Wow. So that suggests to me that it wasn't, there may have been a denial of service attack, and that might have affected some, but at some point, whether it came after or in anticipation of such, it looks like they shut down their servers to some domains, or probably all but their own internal domains or something like that. I mean, it's something that we could, if someone wanted to take the time and investigate it, it's just not a priority right now. It would be an interesting story, but that's what I've been able to gather from that.
What was illuminated in the document that you've got your hands on now?
I started with this document for two reasons. One, because I knew it had been unlawfully denied, and I wanted to address that, and I believed we had the ability to do so. And really, it's a great victory for the people who got involved in this. I mean, we forced them to do something that they had previously denied fairly quickly. And I hope people have learned from that, both the people who participated and those who are going to learn about this, that we can do a lot. And this is a citizen empowering set of laws. But I also did it because I knew it would be easier to get this document from them than from the Ferguson Department, which really is defensive about giving any of this information up. So I had hoped to learn more from what we got in this. They provided the document I requested, and they provided the document I didn't request. They redacted part of the document I didn't request, and I'm not sure the redactions are lawful. They're relying on a lawful exemption, but I think they're stretching the exemption to apply to it. It's called a CAD report. That's the call-out transcript of the official communications from the police radios. And I can't really tell what they've redacted. I haven't studied it enough yet to figure it out. But with the incident report, what I learned is that the St. Louis County incident reports are very narrowly defined, and they're being defined by the Sunshine Law disclosure requirements. And that's an interesting, I've never encountered that. And so it gives us really basic information. When they were called in, what they were called in for, who responded and who approved and that kind of stuff. Because they were called in to investigate the shooting by another agency, right? So they were called in because a Ferguson police officer shot and killed someone, and they declared this a homicide. A homicide doesn't mean it's an illegal act. It just means it's a killing of a person by another person. And so what I got was really just the time, place, names, and that's it. What's missing that is normally in these incident reports, particularly, which is not the case in this, if an arrest is made or a charge is put out, there's usually a narrative from the officer. And that narrative usually says, I was called out at such and such a time for such and such a purpose. I arrived at the scene. This is what I saw at the scene. This is what I discovered at the scene. And based upon this, I have determined that there's probable cause that the following crime existed, and therefore we charge this and even possibly arrest somebody. Because they didn't do that, I don't really find their incident report that problematic. If they did arrest somebody and charge someone, I would expect to see more. So now what we now know is that we have to now go the next step, which is directly to Ferguson and ask for their incident report if they have one. And we know some very interesting information about Ferguson. The chief of police, or the police department, released immediately the robbery incident report, or the alleged robbery. So they can't claim now that the other incident report is part of the investigation, since the robbery would be as well, and is exempt. So by providing that, they're basically saying, we've already admitted that it's not an exempt record. Now, I guarantee you they're going to claim it's exempt when I ask for it, which I'll do in the morning.
Right.
But I want to give them the...
refused autopsy records recently, too.
And I've made a request for the autopsy records from the county. She's at the university. And I've made, and she's been silent and not, so, but we'll move forward with that. I don't know of any exemption for the autopsy records. There may be one in there hidden somewhere, but, you know, I'd like to see them actually tell me what it is. But I'm giving her a couple days before I follow up on that. But on this one, I anticipate that they're going to play games, because almost always these agencies do. There are a few exceptions to the rule, but again, these people don't like, public officials and public agencies don't like public records laws, and they don't think that they have to comply with them, which is a real problem, especially when law enforcement agencies. But the incident report from Ferguson, however, that has been released, not only proves that they're not claiming in that case that it was exempt, but they put it out in order to paint the victim in a bad light. You know, this guy was a criminal. He was a robber, and he just robbed the store, so it was therefore justified for the shooting. That's just not the way the law works, or logic, or morality. But what we do know is not only have they provided that, but we also know what they look like. And we know in that report there's a narrative from the officer. And so that's what we should expect when we get the next round, which is the Ferguson incident report. And of course, that's only the first step, because after that, we'll find out more information, and we know what other records may be available to obtain even during the pendency of an investigation. We can't get the investigation reports. And I have no problem with that. I mean, the investigation report really isn't final until it's done. But the evidence that they may be looking at, if they're public records on their own, ought to be provided. And so we'll go from there. So what I expect, just to give you an update, is tomorrow morning they'll receive my public records request at Ferguson. I would hope to hear back in less than 3 days from them, and I would hope that they would comply with the law and just give it to me. I anticipate that they'll, at best, send me a denial and say it's exempt. And they probably won't even say why it's exempt. And so I'll have to follow up with that. Once I get that denial, if I get that denial, I'm going to call on people to do the same sort of global public records request. And I hope maybe this time we can get 1,000.
I assume that you're going to be putting that document that you picked up today on your website?
It will be. I'm going to put it on Scribd, where I put most of these documents. My website's not up and running right now, but I'll also put it up on Photography is Not a Crime's website, which I contribut to.
Okay,
and
great.
I've got stories on that, so I'll put it there sometime tonight. I just haven't had a chance yet to do it. I've been reviewing it first. And I only got it a couple hours ago. It's a first step, and it is a powerful demonstration of what we can do, because people need to learn. I'm not saying that protesting, traditional protesting, is wrong or bad, but marching around in the street chanting can only do so much. Now, if you incorporate those actions with other things, especially taking the law into your own hands, that's meant to be in your own hands. Citizen empowering laws like sunshine laws, open records, open meetings. We can do far more. And yet the activist community has not learned this. And I'm hoping to introduce that kind of a strategic approach to people so that we can begin taking advantage of these laws. Because it has two effects. One, we stand up for our rights and get the records, but we also turn the table, and they become the lawbreaker when they deny the public records law.
Right.
And by the way, if you look at how I'm not saying what the officers did is necessarily justified,
Hmm.
Although it's far closer to what would be justifiable if everything the official story is saying is true, except for a real problem that ought to be addressed, and that is today, and this is a fairly recent phenomenon, police are being trained to shoot to kill rather
Right.
than to shoot to stop. And that only recently changed, but it has become the paradigm that the police culture operates under.
They came out with this report yesterday about a orbital socket fracture with the police
Yeah.
officer. Would you be able to obtain those records as well?
Depending on what the record is, you shouldn't be able to obtain the medical record unless that medical record has been turned into a public record, because it would be a private, HIPAA-protected personal record. If it was then submitted to the police department as evidence justifying the shooting, it becomes a public record, maybe with partial information redacted or all that. So I'd have to think about that and
It's
look at the
suspicious
law.
because it comes up a full week after the incident that they now have this scan, which isn't the actual scan that they're floating around. It's a news stock photo of a scan. So with the legitimacy of and the credibility of what they're saying, kind of dangling by a thread, it would be very interesting to confirm that.
It is possible that the officer suffered an injury. To start with, that still doesn't justifying shooting or shooting to kill, because that can only be done legally and morally if the officer's life is in jeopardy or another person's life is in jeopardy, not because you're afraid of getting beat up, or suffering an injury like that. That's not the kind of injury that you respond to with deadly force. So if you were a citizen and got into a fist fight with somebody and he fractured your orbital socket, which sounds a lot more than it is. I mean, orbital socket is a very easy thing to fracture.
Yeah.
But if you shot and killed someone because they did that, you'd be charged with probably manslaughter or something like that, and probably convicted. And a police officer, if they did the same, ought to be held accountable to the same law. Police officers should not have an extra right that they can use whatever force they want to stop anything. It should be the same standard, at least, as a citizen.
You probably know. How often does that happen?
What?
That a policeman is charged with unintentional manslaughter or one of those other crimes?
Almost never. This was a study that actually went back 100 and something years. But a person, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, who is from Wisconsin, whose son was killed by police, actually forced the Wisconsin legislature to create a law to require certain external investigations into any police killings, which ought to be standard, rather than them doing their own internal investigations, which are, first of all, that concept has always been rejected as, you don't let someone be a judge in their own case. But that's the standard in most police departments. And believe me, their investigations presume justifications from the start and conclude justifications. So he actually did a full sort of scientific academic study going back to the beginning of formal policing in Wisconsin, which is about 150 years worth of records, and found that there was never, not one case in that 150 or something years where a police officer was found to have been unjustified in shooting and killing, and there was one case that was an exception. The police department found justification, and a grand jury found justification, and then further research by citizens produced more evidence on top of that, and ultimately forced it to be declared unjustified. So just using that as a case study, you can see the problem. If you go back and you look at how this became such a hot topic, it didn't become a hot topic because of this shooting or because of the New York chokehold. Right. Because those things are going on every single day and aren't being noticed, but they were noticed this time. And I got involved with Albuquerque, and I put so much effort in Albuquerque for the very purpose of taking that story and forcing the media to begin paying attention to it. And we did. If you follow what happened in April and May and June with Albuquerque stories, and you see how eventually they got into the mainstream major media, that set the context. And in the aftermath of that, with those journalists thinking about this topic and seeing its salience to their audience and to their job, they began picking up on these other stories. And that's how we got there. It's through citizen journalism putting the agenda into the mainstream media. And that's an important lesson to learn, because it's not just a critique of the mainstream media, and there are things to criticize it on this for, but it's to recognize the limitations of the mainstream media and how it normally operates, and how the citizen journalist approach can supplement that and can push that other journalistic side in the right directions.
Right. I mean, they have to, just to be competitive now. I mean, it's really kind of a market-based need to remain relevant. If they're going to keep talking about Miley Cyrus, nobody's going to keep tuning in.
And so citizen journalists are free to delve deeper and longer into a question and do the hard work and basically write the story that then becomes the seed for the story of the mainstream media. And if we learn that, and we learn how to use that, the mainstream media will be improved, and therefore public information and understanding will be improved.
Well, let me thank you once again for giving us the scoop on the Ferguson papers that you've got your hands on. And I want to encourage everyone to tune in to your show on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on Occupy Television. It's something you shouldn't miss. Thanks again.
And just to give you a teaser, tomorrow night's episode is going to have at least 2 things that are going to shock the hell out of people.
Well, we love that.